I didn't notice the roasted chicken first. I noticed the way the room carried everyone's laughter like it was proud of them. Plates moved. Glasses sang their thin, cheerful song. And the house wore its Sunday best bread, still warm on the cutting board. A vase of carnations leaning toward the light like curious children. If a stranger had walked in at that moment, they would have thought everything in our family was precisely as it should be, a celebration for Nathan's promotion to regional sales manager. The kind of milestone that comes with promises and polished smiles. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments from the hallway. I watched the scene play out before I decided to join it. Nathan's voice rose above the chatter bright. Confident. Perfectly tuned to approval. Melanie flitted between the kitchen and the table, keeping everything just so, her cheeks flushed with the pleasure of getting it right. I had told myself, on the drive over, to let the evening belong to them. It was, after all, their story tonight, not mine. Still. The moment the door closed behind me and the familiar scent of rosemary and heat met my face, I felt that small tug in my chest, the one that appears when joy forgets to set an extra place at the table. Lately, I've learned that pride can sit next to loneliness without anyone noticing. You raise your glass. You nod at the good news. You let the young be photographed by the moment. And you try not to think about all the wires under the floorboards that make the lights stay on. I took my usual seat, the one near the end of the table where the draft from the window keeps a man honest. I listened. Nathan retold the email that changed his title, exaggerated the timing for effect, earned the laughter, fair and square. He looked like success, looks in magazines, good posture, watch catching the chandelier, an ease in the neck and shoulders that says the future has already agreed with him. I wanted to be only proud. I wanted to be spare and uncomplicated. Like a well-built bridge, you can forget while you cross it. But there is a certain fatigue that lives in old scaffolding. A hum that doesn't stop just because the ribbon has been cut somewhere else. While the wine breathed and the bread surrendered its steam, I found myself inventorying the small things, the way Melanie kept glancing at me without letting her eyes land, how Nathan's chair claimed a little too much space, the silence that rushed in whenever someone mentioned years of hard work. I have my share of those years. They live in my hands, in my back, in a filing cabinet of receipts I never needed to show. It wasn't resentment, or at least that's what I told myself. I've never been one for tallying who paid for what or when. If fatherhood is a ledger, it's the sort that lives in the dark, where you can add without counting. Still, something in me kept touching the bruise of being unacknowledged, like a man who can't help checking a loose tooth with his tongue. It wasn't about money. It never is. Not really. It was about the quiet, the kind that grows when you're present but unseen. When your presence is so dependable, it dissolves into the walls. Dad, can you pass the salad? Melanie's voice was light. Careful. I passed it. Nathan was in the middle of a story about a quarterly target, a gentle mockery of an old colleague who couldn't keep up with the new software. Everyone laughed the way people do when the punchline is safe. I laughed, too. It felt important to be generous with my face. A toast followed. Someone hit their glass with a fork, and the room tilted toward attention. Nathan thanked his team, his boss, his mentor from years back. He thanked Melanie for the late nights and for believing in him. I raised my glass like everyone else. His eyes scanned the table. Warm. Victorious. Busy. If they passed over me, it must have been quick, like a train through a small town at midnight. The kind of visit you hear, more than see. The evening continued on rails. The grandchildren ran in and out like weather. The dog auditioned for the floor beneath the table. Stories stacked on stories, the way plates stack in a sink. Inevitably, I kept telling myself that this was good, that a father's job is to make the room sturdy, and then let other people decorate it. But a sentence had begun to form at the back of my throat, the kind that starts as a whisper and becomes a visitor who refuses to leave. I swallowed it once, twice, when Nathan leaned back in his chair, a king satisfied with his small kingdom, and said something about how, these days, it's all about agility, not the old grind. I felt the visitor step into the light. I set down my fork and watched the evening from somewhere just outside my body. None of this was new. The promotion, the stories, the way the room would eventually wash the dishes of this night clean. What was new was the pressure on my ribs, a reminder that certain truths, if you keep them quiet long enough, grow sharp edges. I looked at Melanie's hands. They are her mother's hands, capable, soft around the fingertips, strong where it matters. She caught my eye for half a second, then looked away. Not unkindly, just busy with the performance of happiness. I could have let it pass. I could have let the night be exactly what it meant to be. But the thing about foundations is this: when they shift, the cracks don't announce themselves with trumpets. They whisper through the paint. And once you hear that whisper, it's hard to pretend you didn't. So I sat there, the proud man with the patient smile, tasting rosemary and heat, and took one quiet breath after another, preparing, though I didn't yet know it, for the moment a celebration would become a reckoning, and a father would finally decide to speak. And then, as if the room had been waiting for a cue I couldn't hear, the moment arrived. Nathan tipped his glass and let his chair drift onto its back legs. A casual coronation. You know, he said, eyes glittering with the confidence of new brass. These days it's all about agility, not the old grind. Must be nice. Logan retirement. No deadlines. No, real responsibilities. Just the good life. A quiet shifted under the laughter, like a current changing direction beneath calm water. I smiled the way a man smiles when the doctor tells him the needle won't hurt a reflex against what's coming. The quiet has its price, I said, reaching for my napkin, as if my hands needed a job to keep the words from wandering. You'd be surprised how loud the clock is when the office goes away. He waved that away with the ease of a man sorting email. Sure, but real accomplishment now is different. Everything's digital. Faster. You build with code, not concrete. Younger minds eat this stuff for breakfast. He laughed. And the table, loyal to the temperature of the guest of honor, laughed with him. If arrogance has a scent, it's cologne after midnight too much. Everywhere. Insisting on itself. I could feel Melanie's attention slide toward me and back. A glance smoothed into a gesture of tidying the cutlery. I told myself to let it pass. He was celebrating. This was his night. But something inside me, a beam long hidden behind drywall, creaked. When was the last time you built something? Logan, Nathan asked. The question sugar-dusted like a donut that still makes a mess. I mean, really built something. I looked at my hands, at the faint white lines that once were blisters, and before that, choices. Bridges don't answer back. I wanted to say, they just carry you. Instead, I kept my voice even. I used to design structures that hold weight even when nobody's clapping. I said, different kind of breakfast? He chuckled, leaning forward as though letting me in on a joke. Yeah, but the world was simpler then. 12-hour days and brute force work ethic. Inefficient. Now. We optimize. The word clicked like a lid on a plastic container. The room's warmth cooled a degree. Laughter thinned. My daughter's smile turned into the kind of line you draw when you don't want to smudge the picture. I felt the sentence that had been living in my chest stir. Stretch. Look for a door. Congratulations again, I said, meaning it. Because a good thing is still a good thing, even if it's wearing the wrong shoes. Agility is a fine thing for software. For families, foundations matter. He didn't notice the bridge I laid at his feet. Or maybe he did and chose the river instead. Foundations are legacy thinking, he said, tapping his watch with 2 fingers. Move slow, and you get left behind. Something old and stubborn in me stood up. Not my body, my spine of years. I pictured the rebar in a column, the cage of steel that never expects applause. Left behind by what? I asked softly. Speed without direction. He smiled the bright smile of a man who believes questions are just late compliments. By the future, it was strange. The tenderness that bloomed in me, that not anger, not even pride. Tenderness, the kind you feel for a child who confuses volume with truth. I set down my glass. The crystal made a small, precise sound, as if it knew what precision was for. Careful. Nathan, I said, my voice even and almost kind. Some things only look slow because they're built to last. Around the table, conversation paused on its heels. The grandchildren stalled in the doorway like sparrows, reconsidering flight. Melanie's hands knotted the edge of her apron, then released. I could feel the room leaning. If the evening had been a bridge, we had just stepped onto the span's center, where wind learns the difference between swagger and sway. And the sentence I'd swallowed twice was walking steadily toward daylight. It arrived in the chime of my glass, in the hush that spread like ink in water. And by the time I lifted my eyes, the room had already made a small clearing for truth. Nathan was smiling, reflex more than feeling, and Melanie stood half-turned toward the kitchen, as if the right utensil could keep the evening from slipping. I could have given the night back to them. I could have let the bridge sway and say nothing. Instead, I put both palms on the table, feeling the grain like old bark. And I spoke. Congratulations, Nathan. I began, keeping the first brick kind. May your future be fast and bright. I let the kindness land, then set down the load it had been carrying. And while we're celebrating building, I should tell you something about what's been holding this house up. Melanie's eyes found mine. A question already forming. Nathan's watch flashed once beneath the light. I've been paying for more than holidays, I said, not raising my voice. Time does not need volume to be heard. The mortgage, the car notes, the kids' tuition, the quiet emergencies you didn't name. For years, the present stopped moving. Somewhere, the oven clicked as it cooled. A fork slid against a plate and decided not to fall. Nathan's smile inverted into a straight line, like a door remembering it can close. That's not, he started, but the sentence didn't know where to go. It isn't a complaint, I said. It was love, the kind that prefers a bank transfer to a speech. I did it because I could, and because I wanted you to run without pebbles in your shoe. I took a breath, but it ends tonight. Melanie gripped the back of a chair as if the floor had tilted. Her voice came small. Careful. The way you test ice. Dad, why now? Because foundations don't belong on autopilot. I said, because help, given long enough and quiet enough, becomes air and you can't see the sky while someone else is breathing for you. Because I listened to a man I respect talk about speed and optimization and leaving the old behind. And I realized I've been teaching the opposite comfort without consequence. Nathan looked at the table the way a man studies a map and can't find the river he fell into. The bravado had drained out of him. Leaving. For the first time that night, a face I recognized young. Un armored. Uncertain. So what now, he asked. Now you build. I said, not with my scaffolding. With yours. I'll cheer. I'll advise when you ask. But I will not be your safety net. Silence is a generous teacher. It gave everyone a chair. Melanie's shoulders shook once, and then she steadied herself, nodding without agreement. Because sometimes the body understands before the mind does. Nathan's jaw worked, assembling words he could trust. I didn't know, he said finally. I didn't let you. I answered. That's on me. I folded my napkin, as if it were a plan I was retiring. But ignorance and dependency look like twins from far away. Up close. They part ways. Tonight. I'm choosing the parting. No one clapped. No one cried loudly. The grandchildren, sensing weather, stayed in the hallway and watched with the solemn curiosity of sparrows. The evening did not collapse. It reconfigured same table. New load paths. I lifted my glass once more. Not for a toast, but for punctuation. To the work that lasts. I said, may it begin? The words hung where the toast should have been, and no one reached up to take them down. For a heartbeat, the room forgot its choreography. The carnations leaned in as if to listen. The oven made its tired metal sigh. Melanie's fingers opened and closed on the chair back. The way someone tests their grip after a fall. Nathan stared at the tablecloth like it might unfold a different ending if he waited it out. I kept my hands flat, feeling the tremor in the grain. The small echo that follows truth when it finally lands. I didn't mean, Nathan began. And then the sentence collapsed under its own weight. He tried again. Getter. The brass of his promotion dulled to a human voice. I didn't know. Logan. I swear I didn't. I know you didn't. I said, gentle, not rescinding. That's the point. Melanie pulled in a breath like someone stepping into cold water. Dad, we thought we were managing. She glanced at Nathan, then back at me, settling on honesty, because there was nothing else left. We weren't. I could feel an old reflex waking the one that reaches for a wallet or a plan before anyone else feels the floor tilt. I didn't move. Love, mishandled, becomes a pillow over the face. You'll manage, I said, just not the old way. Silence lifted a corner, inviting argument. None came. The grandchildren, sensing a weather change they had no names for, drifted toward the den, shepherded by a cartoon's safe brightness. In their absence, to the room was an X-ray bones of the evening, showing through expectations, dependencies, the outline of a story that had been telling itself for years without permission. Nathan rubbed his watchband with his thumb, the gesture of a boy who once worried a scab. So this is it, he asked, meeting my eyes at last. You're done paying. I'm done removing consequences. I said, there's a difference. I let the line sit where it could be seen from both sides. I'll still be your father. I just won't be your infrastructure. Something in him gave way, not a collapse, but a settling, the kind of shift you hear in a house before it stops creaking. His shoulders lowered. He nodded once. The smallest bow to reality I'd ever seen him make. Okay, he said, and I believed him enough to be afraid for him and proud at the same time. Melania stepped closer, her voice steadying. What do we do first? Inventory. I said, not of things, of truths. What's owed? What's wasted? What matters? I pushed my chair back and stood. the scrape sounding like a ruler drawn across a clean page. Then you call the people you've been avoiding and use your real voices. No anger rose to meet us. Only fatigue, and beneath it, relief. A table built for celebration was, it turned out, sturdy enough for reckoning. I thanked Melanie for dinner because gratitude belongs everywhere. Even at the scene of an undoing, Nathan moved as if to hug me, then paused. Unsure who he was, inside a world with edges, I saved him by reaching for my coat. At the door, I looked back once. The house I had floated for them for years sat squarely on its own footings. Suddenly visible. Imperfect. Honest. Melanie rested a hand on Nathan's arm, and for the first time all night I saw them as builders, not tenants. Outside, the air had the clean taste evenings get after hard rain. My chest felt empty and right, like a room after clutter is carried out. Behind me, the celebration smoldered into quiet. Ahead of me, a long, ordinary mercy, letting grown people be exactly that. I walked to the car without hurrying, the night making room for the sound of a life clicking back into its proper load. The quiet followed me into the car and sat in the passenger seat like an honest friend. I let the engine idle and watched the house through the windshield, its windows warm and square, a lantern made of ordinary life. A month ago I would have waited in the driveway until the kitchen light went off, as if my gaze could hold their roof in place. Tonight I gripped the wheel and understood at last that a roof is only a promise when the people beneath it know how to stand on their own floors. Driving home, the road unspooled like a tape measure across familiar distances. The wipers counted slow seconds. Somewhere between the turnpike and the old sycamore, the ache in my chest rearranged itself into clarity. I had called it love. I had told myself I was protecting them from weather, smoothing their path, making sure the future didn't collect tolls. It didn't deserve, but protection without permission becomes control with good manners and generosity. If it never meets a boundary, fatingzinho, dependence. I thought of the first check I wrote after Melanie's second child was born, how right it felt, how easy. One check became a habit, the habit became infrastructure. They learned to plan around my quiet, yes, the way a city plans around a river, as if it will never change course. Somewhere in there, the lesson I meant to teach diligence, steadiness. The ethics of showing up got muffled under the comfort I kept delivering. I did not mean to make them small. I only meant to make the world kinder than it had been to me. But kindness without friction is a crib with high rails. You don't fall, but you also don't learn to walk. At a red light, I looked down at my hands on the wheel veined. Nicked. Competent. These hands had poured concrete at dawn and signed loan papers at noon. They knew both weight and digits. They also knew how to reach for a wallet before a sentence finished asking for help. Tonight, they had done something harder, nothing. Doing nothing God. What a brutal craft when you love people. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the rain had started again. A finer kind. The sort that teaches streets their own names. I killed the engine and listened to the metal settle. The house greeted me with the smell of books and old leather. Rooms that remembered where I'd put my life. I didn't turn on the big light. I left my coat on the chair like a flag of truce and sat in the study, where maps and bridges lean on the walls and the clock earns its keep. That's where the realization landed, not with fireworks, but with the soft thud of a tool put back in the right drawer. Love isn't the removal of load, it's the sharing of it until the other back is strong. I had been carrying, not sharing. I had mistaken silence for humility and secrecy for virtue. The truth was simpler and sterner. I was afraid to watch them fail, afraid to hear the sound of consequences, afraid that their pain would echo some old corridor in me. I'd boarded up years ago, so I built them a catwalk over every gap and called it Care. No more catwalks. The phrase wrote itself across the dark like chalk on a beam. I poured a glass of water and felt the sweetness ordinary things have when you take your hands off everything else. If regret visited, it didn't stay. In its place came a steadier guest resolve. Not to harden, but to aim. To bless from the porch, instead of lifting from the basement. To answer questions with questions that teach grip. What do you owe? What can you sell? What will you keep? And to accept the long, unglamorous thunder of other people building. The clock ticked. Somewhere across town. Another roof. Learned its true weight. I leaned back. Let the house hold me. And, for the first time in years, allowed the future to belong to the ones who will have to live there. Resolve has a quiet metabolism. It digests you slowly. The next morning I woke to a phone buzzing on the nightstand. 3 missed calls from Melanie. One from Nathan. And a text that said simply, "Can we talk a month ago?" I would have called before the kettle boiled. I made tea instead and watched the steam write brief sermons in the air. Love, I reminded myself, is not a fire extinguisher. You can't stop spraying. I wrote back, I love you. I'm here to advise, not to fund. When you're ready, bring a list. We'll talk through it. Then I put the phone face down and listened to the house breathe. Boundaries sound like abandonment to the parts of you that are used to rescuing. I let those parts protest and kept my hands in my pockets. Days arranged themselves around ordinary chores. I walked the perimeter of the yard, trimmed a hedge that hadn't asked for attention in years, to fix the back gate so it would close without bargaining. In the evenings I read old field notes, pencil ghosts of bridges begun and finished, and slept with. The windows open to hear the honest argument of wind and trees. The urge to just this once softened with each sunrise, like a muscle choosing not to flinch. When Melanie finally called, her voice had a new edge, fear honed into focus. "We've listed the bills," she said. Paper rattled on her end. Mortgage, car, tuition. The credit cards. I've marked due dates. We've cut subscriptions. Nathan's talking to HR about extra shifts. Can you look at the order? I can. I said. Email it. We'll triage together. Advice, not intervention. Grip leçon, not a harness. Nathan texted later that night. I negotiated the internet plan down $40. Feels small. Feels like something. I stared at the message longer than the news warranted and let pride bloom without display. Small is how cities begin again after earthquakes string by string. Wire by wire. Silence lived between our calls. Not hostile. Just spacious. The kind of quiet you get in a workshop after the saw stops. And before someone blows the dust from a new seam, there were stumbles. A payment missed because autopay had always been my shadow. A tense Sunday where Melanie confessed she hadn't told Nathan about a store card. I didn't mediate. I said, tell him tonight. Sit at the table. Use numbers. Not blame. Then choose the next right call. On the 3rd week, I drove past their street by accident or habit and saw a cardboard box on the curb labeled Closed Donate. I kept going. Your heart will insist that presence equals help. Sometimes presence equals rewind. At night, when the house was a dark, kinned vertebrae around me, the old fear still visited. What if they fall so hard they don't get up? The answer arrived wearing work boots. Then they will learn how to stand. You cannot send that lesson by parcel. By the end of the month, progress had a rhythm. Melanie had a spreadsheet that looked like a bridge plan spans. Loads, redundancies. Nathan had an extra line on his paycheck and fewer lines on his wants. Our calls shortened and deepened. "We can do this," Melanie said one evening, surprising herself as the words left her. "Good," I said. "That sentence is a tool. Keep it where you can reach it." After we hung up, I stepped onto the porch. The street was ordinary and faithful, somewhere across town. A young family was learning the slow grammar of consequence. I stood under a sky with no scaffolding and let the ache and the peace take turns being true. The sky didn't answer, but the next morning the world did. Melanie arrived with a binder clutched to her chest, the kind of school supply you buy when you plan to change your life. We sat at my kitchen table, neutral ground with honest light, and she opened to a page labeled in careful block letters, Plan. Columns marched across the paper: due date, minimum, interest, new balance. Her handwriting had always leaned forward, impatient for the next thing. Today it stood straighter. "We called the mortgage company," she said. "We asked for a forbearance review. They said to send pay stubs and a hardship letter. I wrote the letter. Nathan edited it." A small pause. Not for applause, but for breath. We canceled the gym, the streaming, the meal boxes. I'm covering extra shifts at the store for 3 weeks. Nathan came in late, flushed from a run that looked more like penance than exercise. He set a water bottle down and, without prompting, said, "I'm sorry for the way I spoke at dinner." No garnish. No defensive garnish. Just the sentence, as it needed to be. I thought speed meant strength. Turns out, it's direction. We triaged the binder. Mortgage first. Then the highest interest card. Then the car with the balloon payment hiding under next spring. Each decision made a soft click inside me, like tools returning to their hooks. When they hit a place where numbers refused to cooperate, we didn't perform arithmetic by hope. We drew a line through a want and called it wisdom. The first test arrived 2 days later, a pale envelope from the utility company with the tone of a neighbor who has repeated himself. Melanie texted a photo of it, past due in sturdy red. I typed and erased a dozen replies before sending. "You've got this. Call them before 5. Ask for the payment plan. Put it on speaker so you both hear." 10 minutes later, she wrote back, "On a plan. $75 today. $50 next Friday. No disconnect. Progress has small feet and a loud heart. You hear it in receipts that add up to less. In lunches packed at the table where impulsive dinners used to swagger. I watched them practice the new grammar pause. Look at the number. Ask the question, do we need it? Or do we want it to pretend we're fine? Their days grew plainer and somehow larger. There were stumbles, honest ones. Nathan forgot a subscription that renewed itself like a weed. Melanie overcorrected and brought home groceries too thin to cover a week. But the phone calls between us changed shape. Less pleading, more reporting, less heat, more light. We sold the second TV, Nathan said one evening. Almost cheerful. Turns out a conversation fits better in that space. Anyway, on Sunday, I visited and found the living room rearranged. The big couch faced the window now, as if the house wanted to watch itself become. Boxes labeled "Donate" lined the hall. Melanie brewed coffee that tasted like an apology, mended into gratitude. Nathan showed me a spreadsheet where green cells had begun to outnumber red. "It isn't pretty," he said, "but it's ours." I stood in the doorway and took in the new load paths, their posture, in their voices when they disagreed but didn't break. The way the children asked for snacks and got fruit without a negotiation masquerading as love. This was work, and it looked good on them. Not glamorous. True. Driving home, I realized the ache in my chest had changed temperature. Pride, like concrete, cures slowly. You don't rush it or it doesn't hold. They were building now with their own hands. My job was no longer to lift, but to keep the blueprints where they could borrow them, and to believe out loud when the wind picked up. When the phone buzzed that night, the message was simple: paid the plan. 8 at home. We're okay. I turned off the lamp and let the dark be a witness. Somewhere, 2 builders were learning to stand, and the floor, at last, was theirs. The text from Melanie paid the plan. 8 at home. We're okay. Was still glowing on my phone when the doorbell rang. Nathan stood on the porch with his cap in his hands, like a man approaching a church. Melanie was beside him, binder tucked under her arm. The children at home with a neighbor. The evening had that clear, rinsed light that forgives roofs and sidewalks for being plain. We need to talk, Nathan said, not as a warning, but as a request. At the kitchen table, the same neutral ground where plans learn their legs, we didn't open the binder. Melanie folded her hands and looked at the wood as if the grain might give advice. Nathan took a breath that let some air out of the room. It isn't the money, he said finally. It never really was. He glanced at Melanie. She nodded for the sentence to keep going. It's what the money let us avoid. Responsibility. Saying no. Admitting we were scared. I hid behind speed. She hid behind. We'll figure it out. You hid behind love. He met my eyes. We all hid. The words landed with the soft authority of a beam set true. I felt no urge to rescue them from their own clarity. I'm sorry. Melanie added, voice steady. Not just for the bills. For making you invisible while you were carrying us. For letting gratitude turn into expectation and then into habit. That's not who I want to be. I nodded and let silence do its work. Shame gets louder when you argue with it. When you acknowledge it, it runs out of job. We've been talking, Nathan said. Really talking. The late night kind where you run out of blame and trip over truth. I said I felt small around you because you were the net. She said she felt small around me because I acted like speed was wisdom. We've been apologizing, but that's not enough. We want to change the rules. What rules, I asked. Not to challenge, but to draw the diagram they were already drafting. He counted on his fingers. An engineer of behavior for once. Rule 1, no debts. We don't name out loud to each other. Rule 2, work before rescue if something breaks. We try to fix it before we ask for help. Rule 3, if we ask for advice. We accept the answer, even if it's slower than our fear. Melanie added, Rule 4, gratitude in public. Disagreements in private. We don't use you as a shortcut or a shield. She looked at me, eyes clear. And Rule 5, we forgive out loud. Ourselves. Each other. You, we move forward. Forgiveness is not a soft word. It is a load-bearing one. It redistributes weight. I felt something shift in me. An old brace no longer needed. I forgive you, I said. Simple as water. I also forgive myself for confusing secrecy with humility. The sentence surprised us all with how little theater it required. We didn't hug right away. We sat in the clean quiet that follows a good alignment. Then Melanie reached across the table. I covered her hand. Nathan exhaled a laugh that had been stuck for years. Tomorrow, he said, I'm calling the bank about the car with the balloon payment. Not to ask for help, just to own it. Tomorrow, Melanie Echwed. I'm adding a column to the spreadsheet time cost. Not just money. She smiled. Turns out, fast has interest. 2. When they left, the porch light cut a bright square around their footsteps. They looked taller, not because the burden had vanished, but because it had been evenly distributed, inside. I stood for a minute in the doorway, to feeling the house settle into a new geometry, fewer hidden beams, more honest joints. The future did not feel lighter. It felt possible in the quiet after. I poured 3 glasses of water, one for the man I had been, one for the people they were becoming, and one for the work ahead. Then I turned off the light, grateful for a night that required no scaffolding at all. Possibility has its own gravity. It draws decisions toward it. 2 weeks after the porch light conversation, Melanie called from a parking lot with the kind of voice that doesn't need a preface. We ran the numbers again. She said, "Honest this time. The house is a museum to a version of us we can't afford to visit. We're going to sell." There was no drama in it. Only alignment. "Then let's list." I said, "Advice, not authorization. Pick a realtor you trust. Price it like truth, not like hope." They arrived that evening with tape, markers, and a calm I hadn't heard in years. We spread boxes across the living room the way surveyors spread flags, naming rooms not by their sentiment, but by their function. Keep, donate, sell, trash. The children made a game of it, holding up an object and guessing its new home as if the house were a map and we were routing the future. When the realtor came, she walked through with the quiet competence of someone who has shepherded many families across this kind of river. She talked comps and timelines. Nathan asked questions that sounded like blueprints instead of wishes. Melanie took notes in the binder, under a new tab, Move. The first open house felt like letting strangers read old letters. I stood in the backyard and watched the afternoon lay itself over the grass that had once been a soccer field. Then a picnic blanket. Then a place where a sprinkler had been accidentally left on all night. Memories travel light. I told myself, and meant it. In the in-between days, the house transformed. The room that had been a warehouse of impulse became a space with corners again. Walls exhaled, where furniture used to insist. Nathan patched nail holes with the concentration of a penitent and discovered he liked the feel of making things even. Melanie rolled paint with the rhythm of someone learning a new language, slow, sure, forgiving. There were frictions, because truth has edges, a low offer that insulted the math, a higher one contingent on a repair that found rot where a shelf had always hung. "We fix what's real," I said when they called. "We don't pay for ghosts." They hired a contractor, negotiated the contingency into fairness. And for the first time I heard in their voices the steadiness of people who are not auditioning for mercy. On the day the offer we'd been waiting for arrived clean. Clear. "Enough," Melanie texted a photo of the signed acceptance, with no caption, none needed. Gravity had done its work. We celebrated with coffee at their kitchen counter. Now, almost bare. The kids drew houses with small windows and bright doors, and told us which room would be for forts. Nathan showed me a spreadsheet with a new column labeled Runway. Green cells marched like spring across it. Smaller rent. No balloon. "We can breathe," he said. I looked around and felt the good ache of a structure coming down the right way by choice. With care. Without sirens. "Proud of you," I said, not for selling, for choosing a life you can carry. That evening, after they left to box up another closet, I walked through their almost house and touched the door frames like a man taking measurements he plans to remember. I didn't feel the urge to fix or to fund. I felt the privilege of witnessing a shift, completed tenants becoming builders, a family moving from performance to proportion. On my porch, the air smelled like rain that might keep its promise. Tomorrow would bring appraisals, final walkthroughs, a key exchanged for a check, and after that new walls, fewer rooms. More room. The work ahead would not be lighter, but it would be theirs to lift. And somewhere at the edge of the map, I could already see the lesson waiting what to keep, what to carry forward. That would close this chapter, the way a well-set beam closes a span. Completion wears a quiet face. The day of the closing, the sky arrived, undecided. A sheet of light that made even the parking lot look ceremonial. We met at a long table with pens that clicked too loudly. Papers stacked like bricks waited for signatures to become walls. Nathan read each page with a carpenter's patience. Melanie kept a palm on the binder as though steadying a ship in mild seas. When the final line took their names, the room exhaled. Keys traded hands. A small metal sound that meant goodbye and also go on. After, we didn't go to a restaurant. We went to their new place, a modest second-floor walk-up that smelled of fresh paint and possibility. The stairs announced themselves. That felt right. Inside. The living room was an honest rectangle. The children bounced echo into it and claimed corners with their drawings. Nathan set the toolbox down. Not as decoration, but as a citizen. Melanie opened the windows and let the air graduate from hallway to home. We ate sandwiches on the floor, plates balancing on moving boxes labeled in a handwriting that now stood wholly upright. They talked in a plural that included responsibility rent due on the 1st. Mail plan on Sundays. The car fund with a real number instead of a hope. I listened and counted load paths the way a man counts blessings, not out loud, but with gratitude that has learned its math. When the children drifted to sleep and the boxes became night furniture, Nathan poured us 3 glasses of tap water and raised his like a person who finally understands what a toast can carry. To building, he said. Not faster. Truer. Melanie touched her glass to ours. To foundation, she added. The kind you earn. I said nothing for a moment because some agreements deserve a little silence before you sign them. On the walk to my car, the staircase felt shorter. The street was a narrower ribbon than their old one, and kinder for it. Nathan followed me out, hands in pockets. Un armoret. I kept thinking, he said softly, that your help made me big. Turns out it made me loud. Doing this ourselves makes me quiet and bigger. I put a hand on his shoulder. The same way I had steadied beams before they married posts. Quiet carries more than noise ever will. He nodded. Not as a performance, but as a man fitting a truth into place. At home, I sat in my study beneath maps. I once used to argue with gravity. The phone buzzed a photo from Melanie, 2 mattresses on the floor. A small lamp. A circle of reading kids. First night. She wrote, "We're happy tired." I let the feeling move through me without trying to own it. Pride. Yes. Relief. Yes. But also a gentler companion. I hadn't expected trust. Not in outcomes, but in process. In the sturdiness that appears when weight is shared and consequences are allowed to speak. Here is the lesson the whole story built toward. As clean as a plumb line, love is not the absence of load. Love is teaching people how to bear it. Scaffolding is for building, not for living. A foundation isn't the concrete you pour for someone else. It's the courage you cultivate until they can pour their own. The work that lasts chooses proportion over performance, direction over speed, and truth over rescue. And when you finally step back, the structure that remains is not your monument, it is their home. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.